as to what they believe the judge should rule in a preliminary hearing. Now, the judge is taking a quick break. The judge is going to say, as he said, he's going to collect his thoughts, review his notes, and come back with a decision today. But before we get to that decision, let's talk about the arguments that both sides made. Now, the prosecution reiterated, we simply got to show probable cause or sufficient evidence in this case, and they believe that they did so in this hearing. The main thing that I think both sides are really contesting was this concept of having like a formal agreement. Now, while the prosecution is arguing that a formal agreement can be implied, and both Chad and Lori attempted to convince Melanie to either not cooperate with the cops or provide false information, they were married to that at that point. In terms of finding probable cause, they said that the court watched for themselves video of Lori telling the police that JJ was in Arizona and with Melanie Gibb, and through a phone call where Lori and Chad were present, they also heard and admitted to Lori that she did feel that God instructed her to do this. Now, you can kind of see where the prosecution is going with that, but the defense came out pretty strong, swinging, saying, hey, there's not enough here. They've given you breadcrumbs where they've promised you a meal, even if the burden is that much lower than what you would see at a trial or elsewhere. He was really pointing out, and he being the defense attorney, really pointing out that there's not really a concealment here. There is no real facts that lend itself to say that, hey, these two parties conspired to do any of this. There's no real connection, no communication, and while it can be implied, a simple marriage is not enough that goes towards conspiracy. He also, being the defense attorney, brought up there's no overt act. There's nothing that says that Chad Daybell actually took steps towards the completion of this crime that you would need from a conspiracy, because you can't just say, well, I overheard this story and therefore I'm a part of the conspiracy. You've got to take steps towards it. Buy a shovel, plan to go somewhere, whatever it may be. The defense came out swinging with some pretty technical arguments, but the question will be in moments when you hear from the judge whether or not those technical arguments will win the day. Now remember, if the defense wins, this doesn't mean they're not guilty. It doesn't mean they get to walk away. This is simply a question of commitment into jail and how they proceed going forward. In Idaho, if they can impanel a grand jury sometime in the near future, this will go to a grand jury and try to find out whether or not there's probable cause to go forward in a different route. So don't think that either decision really gets them off the hook. Now, Laura, that was a long-winded way of explaining what we just saw. Kind of break down where you saw the strong arguments, the weak arguments. What were your thoughts of some of the presentation in the closing arguments by both sides?
Let's start with the prosecution. Obviously, they do have a problem here. This idea that, and it's okay, you can argue that it can be inferred, that the formal agreement, they can't always be in a room recording people as they're agreeing to commit a conspiracy or a crime. So a lot of it is circumstantial. And in this case, that's what he's arguing. But I agree with the defense that they don't have strong evidence of it. And the idea that a marriage and having been together and discussing some of these issues, whether it be with Melanie or certain things that were said to the cops, these may not come up to the level of an overt crime. But I think one of the issues that the defense is going to have is, I already can see this. I would be surprised if the judge does not hold Chad to answer. I don't see the judge letting it go. I think this is going to go to the next level, and it's going to be held to answer, and probable cause is going to be found. And I think the elephant in the room is the following: the bodies of the children were found in the backyard. So the idea that there's no concealment is going to be very easy to show circumstantially, at least for purposes of a preliminary hearing and probable cause, that, there is concealment here, okay? And as far as the conspiracy, which is a separate charge, maybe that's not as strong, but I mean, this is only, sufficiency of the evidence. It's probable cause. The threshold is very low. And I wouldn't be surprised if the judge says, there's enough. The bodies were found here. We can hear them both. Even Chad at some point is not even willing to give a phone number, his wife's phone number to the authorities. I mean, he's really delaying the process. They're not saying what they know. And the underlying argument here is, of course, the presumption is they're involved in the murders and they know where the bodies are hidden. So my position is most likely this is the judge is going to find that there's probable cause and hold him to answer.
And
Even though it's not the strongest of the evidence.
Yeah, no, I would wholeheartedly agree with you there, because when you're thinking about the levels in which the defense needs to overcome, or the prosecution, sorry, because it's their burden, it's a very low level, like you said. But this does kind of like raise an eyebrow or two when you think about it down the line. Of course, both sides haven't played both of their cards. There's a lot more evidence, a lot more information, there's a lot more arguments to be had. But so far, at least for me, I'm a little surprised. I think the defense has a little bit more of an argument than I initially thought going into this preliminary hearing. Do you think that plays into effect going down in the future? Do you think like the prosecution's like, all right, maybe we got to change our strategy a little? Or do you think this is kind of par for the course for preliminary hearings that you've seen?
I think this is a tactical move on the part of the prosecution. I mean, why not? Even if they don't think they've got enough right now to go after Lori Vallow and Chad for their for the murders, it's worth a try from their angle. If you look at it from their angle, try and have them stay in custody with high bails for these felony charges. What have they got to lose? They can try it as a strategy to keep them incarcerated while they're building up their case for the murder charges. And, what's the worst case scenario? Well, the judge says, you know what, there's no probable cause and we've got them freed. But then the best case scenario is they'll be stuck while they're amassing more and more evidence against them for the murder charges. So I think the prosecution is feeling like most likely they feel that they've got nothing to lose here. Why not try? I agree. The defense argument is stronger. I mean, as far as conspiracies go, I mean, this is flimsy evidence. It's very circumstantial and lots of inferring, and there's really not much as far as direct evidence. Probably the strongest evidence that the defense didn't really touch on, again, is the fact that the body's turned up in his backyard. But again, he could always argue that he had nothing to do with it. He didn't know it was done. And of course, that text message, which again, he could say that it was, he was referring to something else. He really did bury a raccoon. He did really do that. And who knows exactly what day Kylie was in fact killed. We know that she was last seen on the 9th. It doesn't mean that that's when it actually happened. It could have happened later, a week later. No one knows exactly when it happened. So I agree with you. The defense has a pretty good argument. But again, I would be surprised, especially that this is probable cause finding. I've always said it. All it takes is a warm body sitting next to defense counsel to get the person to be held to answer a lot of times. And again, I could see that happening in this case. There's a lot of pressure. The public is watching. The threshold is low. And I wouldn't be surprised again if the judge says, you know what, I think there's enough here. Go and deal with this at trial.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you're really starting to see, you touched on it earlier, you're really starting to see the finger pointing, because eventually, if you follow the defense's arguments to its logical end, he's got to point the finger at someone. It's either going to be Lori or Alex, and like you were saying, like the defense is kind of already cultivating this idea that this brother and sister are a lot closer than you might want to think. Do you think that there's some room to run there with this, hey, if you can get this case severed, meaning maybe try them separately, and you can have this finger pointing that it could work, or do you think it might even go as far as maybe one day Chad Daybell testifies against Lori Daybell for a sweetheart deal? Do you think that could be a possibility?
Anything is possible. When you've got the gun pointing at you or the possibility of life in prison, anyone will start talking. Most people will, especially if he truly wasn't involved. If it's true he's not involved, or he was maybe an accessory after the fact, got involved later after the fact, he may be willing to turn against Lori. And you could see that today. It was very, very evident. It was obvious. The questions by defense counsel were setting it up, and you could see, as you said, Brian, he was asking questions like, Lori is very persuasive, and Lori and her brother Alex were extremely, extremely close, was the exact wording used in his question. And we know where that's headed. Lori was convincing, Lori was persuasive. So basically, they're going to argue that Alex was the henchman and Lori was the mastermind, and Chad just happened to be there and fell in love with this manipulative criminal minds.
Yeah, I think
And it may work.
You have the building blocks of a great case in that sense, and maybe a great soap opera, maybe down the line, and it could be an interesting defense to see how it plays out. Well, we're going to take a quick